Once upon a time, in a land called Egypt, there was a baby named Moses. Moses was born at a time when the king of Egypt, called the Pharaoh, was afraid of the Israelites, who had become very numerous. The Pharaoh was worried that the Israelites would become too powerful, so he ordered that all the baby boys born to the Israelites should be thrown into the river. Moses' mother didn't want anything to happen to her baby, so she made a basket out of reeds and covered it with tar to make it waterproof. Then she put Moses in the basket and placed it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. As Moses' sister Miriam watched from a distance, the Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river to bathe. When she saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her servant to fetch it. When she opened the basket, she saw the baby crying and felt sorry for him. She decided to keep him and raise him as her own son. Miriam saw what had happened and approached the princess. "Shall I go and find one of the Israelite women to nurse the baby for you?" she asked. The princess agreed, and Miriam went and got Moses' own mother to nurse him. Moses' mother nursed him until he was old enough to be weaned, and then she took him back to the Pharaoh's daughter. The princess adopted Moses and raised him as her own son. She named him Moses, which means drawn out, because she had drawn him out of the water. Moses grew up in the palace, living as an Egyptian prince, but he never forgot that he was an Israelite, and he felt sorry for his people who were forced to work as slaves. One day, when Moses was out in the desert tending his father-in-law's sheep, he saw a bush that was on fire, but was not burning up. He went closer to see what was happening, and he heard a voice calling his name. "Moses, Moses," the voice said, "take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing." Moses took off his sandals and listened as God spoke to him from the burning bush. God told Moses that he had seen the suffering of the Israelites, and that he wanted Moses to go to the Pharaoh and demand that he let the Israelites go free. Moses was afraid to go to the Pharaoh, but God promised to be with him and to help him. So Moses went to the Pharaoh and told him what God had said. "Let my people go," Moses said, but the Pharaoh refused. He didn't want to let the Israelites go free because they were his slaves, and he didn't want to lose them. God knew that the Pharaoh would not let the Israelites go free easily, so he sent a series of plagues to convince him. The first plague was turning the Nile River into blood. Then there were plagues of frogs, gnats, flies, and locusts. There was a plague that killed all the livestock, and another that caused painful boils to break out on the skin of the Egyptians. But still, the Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go free. Finally, God sent the worst plague of all. He told the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb and put its blood on the doorposts of their houses. That night, God passed through the land of Egypt and killed the firstborn son of every Egyptian family. But he passed over the houses of the Israelites because he saw the blood on their doorposts and knew that they were his people. After the 10th plague, the Pharaoh finally agreed to let the Israelites go free. Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and into the desert. But when they came to the Red Sea, they found themselves trapped, with the Egyptian army closing in behind them. But God told Moses to raise his staff and stretch out his hand over the sea. When he did, the waters of the sea parted, and the Israelites were able to walk through on dry ground. After they crossed the Red Sea, Moses led the Israelites to Mount Sinai, where God gave him the 10 Commandments. These were a set of rules that God wanted the Israelites to follow, so that they could live good and happy lives. Moses came down from the mountain and gave the 10 Commandments to the Israelites, who promised to obey them. For 40 years, Moses led the Israelites through the desert until they finally reached the land that God had promised them. But Moses himself was not allowed to enter. Before he died, Moses spoke to the Israelites and reminded them of all that God had done for them. He told them to always obey God's commandments and to teach them to their children. Then Moses died, and the Israelites mourned for him, but they remembered